Welcome to another set of video blogs. Just want to talk about convergence of security and IT operations and why I actually think it's kind of really interesting for us and what we provide to our clients. Computing cyclic. You know, pretty much every trend happens in a 10-year cycle. And what I'm talking about here is basically centralized, central, distributed, central, right? So let's just take three lumps of the strange-looking camel, I guess. First one would be mainframes, mainframe days. And if you think about it, what I really want to focus on is this, which is IT and what IT does. And basically what IT does is they deliver compute units. Compute units. And that's really something to do your job. Now in the mainframe days, you think about it, it was really about access and sessions, right? So you'd have your session on your mainframe and they would look after the data and make sure it's all there. But basically everything was in a centralized point, and therefore the security-wise was all handled by the IT groups. The more you move towards a distributed model, which was basically, the reason for it was inflexibility. Inflexibility, can't spell that, but basically inflexibility was, you get the advent of the PC and then the laptop, and we really as a workforce became mobile, and then you had distributed data centers and people what I call micro data centers, where, you know, the accounting guy's decided he's got his own servers and he's serving a very critical application. It was out there, but utilization was really, really low, and therefore if you look at TCO, total cost of ownership, in this environment, although flexible and good and agile, TCO, total cost of ownership, was terrible, very, very bad, grumpy people. So the industry really then shifts. So 10 years, you've got centralized, distributed, and then goes into centralized. The core functionality, in my opinion, around that is VMware and multi-core. The reason for that is that you've got micro data centers, large enterprises have huge amounts of servers out there, underutilized, and they want to bring them into a centralized point, but there's only a certain amount of air conditioning or heating or lighting or floor tile that they can use. So they need something which is efficient, that enables you, instead of running an app on a server, you can run multiple applications. And if you think about it, what VMware did is said, okay, we can take your utilization from 6% to 80%, and all you do is you basically line them up and you get into a VMM, virtual memory manager, got your virtual manager itself, and then you basically can drop an application onto this stack and hey presto, does the job, and you've actually got pooling, which means from effective use of multi-core and VMware, you actually get to a point where you can run a high amount of compute resource on limited floor tile, which actually creates and catalyzes in things like centralization. Of course, now we move into cloud, which is a whole different kettle of fish, but it's still inside the same curve as being centralized. Now, if you look at the job of IT's really gone from, you know, what they said before, which is compute use resources and compute units. So they've gone from accessing sessions to delivering PCs, because same thing as a compute unit, PCs, laptops. Now they're moving into VMwares, and guess what they're doing? They're back to the same thing again, which is access control, sessions, and also things like isolation. Now what's kind of fascinating here is, so I've got a NOC, which is exclusively how I'm running the business. Then I move into a distributed model, and I've basically got a NOC, and I have this SOC that appears, because the more distributed the environment, the more risk there is of people getting inside the organization, the more fraudulent, the more forensics, the more security, and they become very boutique, and it becomes a separated division inside of the overall IT structure, and you have security operations centers. And then the more centralized you get, this is why I think convergence has kind of happened, but we're somewhat in denial, is that now IT is doing exactly security functions, because if you look at access control and sessions, and you look at data isolation, that is security. So the NOC and the SOC have converged. Now, why I think it's important to us, because when this happens, you want ubiquity across tools. So it's not about boutique, highest performance wins, it's about actually ubiquity and optimization and utilization. So VMware is a perfect example of that. You know, it didn't run the applications as fast as possible. I mean, between 15 and 25% performance slower. But what it did do is get it into a centralized point, and you had much more efficiency, and that's really what IT looks for. Same thing as telecommunications. If you look at voice over IP, it's dominant now, but it's not the highest performant product, but it's actually something which is ubiquitous. Ethernet would be another example of what they did on the networking side. And then even down in storage, I mean, storage, if you look at things like NAS or SAN, is exactly the same thing, which is, in other words, centralized reusable pool. So these guys pooled CPUs, these guys pooled storage, and then if I think about what we're doing, which is to basically take multiple source devices, in other words, IT data, and we're literally vacuuming it into a centralized repository, and I put a nice little pretty cloud around it, and then I put use cases on the top of it, and it doesn't matter whether the use cases are actually supporting NOC functions or SOC functions, it's actually a virtual data pool. So the same way as this is a virtual CPU pool, and these guys here are basically a virtual storage pool, we're producing the virtual data pool, which is why Convergence is important, and products like ourselves are actually getting increasing adoption across multiple use cases. Thank you.